Jonathan Morgan appeared to have achieved the American dream. He was wealthy, successful, and married to a beautiful woman who seemed to adore him. Their Instagram accounts were filled with green smoothies, vacation sunsets, morning jogs, and inspirational quotes about discipline and success. They were young, attractive, and seemingly unstoppable. Jonathan had built a thriving real estate business in Charleston, South Carolina. He specialized in turning ordinary houses into mini mansions and flipping properties with remarkable ease. His business acumen was matched only by his obsession with maintaining the perfect image. Elise had once been an art teacher at a local high school. She was vibrant, full of dreams, and passionate about her work. But a year into their marriage, she quit her job to help Jonathan build their brand full-time. She managed their content, edited videos, and scheduled promotional events. Everything they did was documented and shared online. Their workouts, their diets, their Sunday brunches, even their cheat days were carefully curated for maximum engagement. To the outside world, they were the epitome of a power couple in the making. But the truth behind their carefully constructed digital world was much darker than anyone could have imagined. Elise had always struggled with her weight, but before marriage, she had been athletic and full of energy. However, 2 miscarriages over the course of 3 years had left her emotionally and physically drained. Her weight fluctuated as she battled stress, hormonal changes, and the endless cycle of trying to meet impossible expectations. Jonathan, obsessed with body image and status, began to show visible frustration with his wife's appearance. The same man who had once praised her curves now grew distant, cold, and condescending. He would strategically leave fitness magazines around the house with pages marked, highlighting articles about weight loss and body transformation. He subscribed her to meal prep services she never asked for. When she cried about the pressure, he told her she was being dramatic. When she skipped a workout, he would post cryptic quotes about discipline over comfort on their social media accounts. To the outside world, he appeared to be a supportive husband pushing his wife to be her best self. But in private, the psychological pressure became unbearable. If you're finding this story as shocking as I am, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss content like this. Trust me, what's coming next will blow your mind. Elise's friends began to notice significant changes in her behavior. Once vibrant and outgoing, she grew quieter and more withdrawn. She stopped meeting friends for brunch and rarely responded to text messages anymore. When her sister asked how things were at home, Elise would simply say it was just a phase and that she was tired. But her eyes told a different story, one filled with fear that she was too afraid to voice. Meanwhile, Jonathan flourished publicly. His business expanded rapidly, and he gained a small but loyal following online. He began hosting local fitness challenges and couple seminars, with Elise always by his side, smiling tightly for the cameras. At home, however, he criticized her food choices relentlessly. He would check her weight behind closed doors and controlled what content appeared on their shared social media accounts. Elise had no privacy whatsoever. Jonathan tracked her phone constantly. He managed all their passwords and even reviewed her private messages. When Elise suggested therapy or marriage counseling, Jonathan would laugh it off, telling her nothing was wrong and that she just needed to focus and commit harder to her goals. He reminded her constantly that people were watching, that their followers admired them, and that she couldn't let them down. He weaponized their public image, and Elise, already drowning in self-doubt, fell silent. Desperately seeking an outlet, she started writing in a private notebook that she hid between the covers of old cookbooks. In it, she detailed her feelings of isolation, her deepest fears, and her growing regrets about marrying Jonathan. She questioned whether love should feel like constant pressure. Her entries became increasingly dark as she wrote about feeling invisible, about being measured by a number on a scale instead of being valued as a person. But despite everything, she never stopped trying. She attempted new diets and new exercise routines. She pushed herself to exhaustion in their home gym, desperately hoping that Jonathan would see her, appreciate her, and love her like he once did. Yet no matter what she did, it was never enough for him. In one particularly heartbreaking entry, dated just weeks before her disappearance, she wrote about feeling like she was disappearing a little more each day. She believed that when Jonathan looked at her, he no longer saw his wife but only saw failure. No one outside their marriage truly understood what was happening. Elise, caught between shame and hope, never reached out loudly enough to be saved. The pressure she endured wasn't just emotional, it was deadly, and soon her silence would become permanent. It was a sunny April morning when Jonathan Morgan made the phone call that would send shockwaves through the small Charleston community. His wife Elise had gone missing. According to Jonathan, she had gone for an early morning jog but had not returned home. Her phone was found on their front porch, but her running shoes were nowhere to be found. Despite a thorough search of their house, no one had seen or heard from her since the previous night. Jonathan appeared frantic during his call to the emergency dispatcher. His voice was breaking as he said he didn't know what had happened, that she was just gone. His words seemed laced with genuine desperation, though something about his delivery felt oddly rehearsed. The police quickly mobilized a search operation, but their initial efforts turned up nothing. Friends and neighbors gathered at the Morgan house, offering their help and support. Jonathan, seemingly unable to sit still, moved from group to group, telling anyone who would listen how worried he was about his wife. Several neighbors mentioned they had seen him leaving the house early that morning, but curiously, no one had actually seen Elise. It was as if she had simply vanished in a thin air. Authorities began systematically combing through the area, searching nearby trails and wooded spaces. A team of volunteers, including several of Jonathan's friends, worked alongside police officers, posting missing person flyers and spreading awareness across social media platforms. Jonathan had the foresight to post an emotional video pleading for Elise's safe return on his Instagram account. His face displayed a convincing mix of sorrow and helplessness. The video quickly garnered thousands of likes and shares, and soon local news outlets picked up the story. His public appearance was that of a desperate husband who had no idea what had happened to the woman he loved. However, there were significant discrepancies in Jonathan's story from the very beginning. Elise's phone, which had been found on her front porch, had stopped transmitting location data at 6:12 in the morning, long before the time Jonathan claimed he had noticed she was missing. Surveillance footage from her neighborhood showed Jonathan leaving the house at 5:50 in the morning, but there was no sign of Elise leaving with him or at any other time. Most puzzling of all, according to multiple neighbors, no one had actually seen her leave the house that morning. The entire scenario simply didn't add up. Yet Jonathan maintained his composure, never wavering in his insistence that Elise had simply disappeared while out for her regular morning jog. Detectives began digging deeper into the couple's personal life. They spoke with friends, former co-workers, and anyone who might have known Elise well. Through these interviews, they learned about her struggles with weight and the immense pressure she felt within her marriage. Several people described her as noticeably withdrawn in recent months. But surprisingly, no one suspected that her relationship with Jonathan had become so severely strained. Elise had never directly voiced any serious concerns about her marriage, but some of her closest friends did recall that she seemed to be under tremendous stress. She had stopped posting as frequently on social media, and when she did share content, her photos seemed staged and lacking the genuine spark that had once made them shine. Her fitness routine had slowed considerably, and she had grown increasingly self-conscious when appearing on camera. Jonathan, on the other hand, seemed determined to maintain their facade of a perfect life. He didn't mention any marital problems during his public appearances, instead focusing entirely on the mysterious circumstances of Elise's disappearance. But behind the scenes, investigators were putting together a very different picture of what had really happened. They began uncovering strange and concerning details about Jonathan's behavior, particularly his actions in the hours immediately after he reported Elise missing. According to phone records, Jonathan had contacted a criminal defense lawyer just hours after calling the police about his wife's disappearance. During subsequent police interviews, his demeanor became noticeably colder and more distant. Officers noted his unusual lack of emotion, even when recounting his supposed initial panic after discovering that Elise was missing. His eyes seemed to dart nervously and avoid direct contact with anyone questioning him. A full week passed with still no signs of Elise anywhere. The case began garnering national attention, with news outlets running stories about the missing wife and her seemingly concerned husband. Jonathan had become a fixture on television, his face appearing across every major news channel as he continued his very public search for Elise. But as the days wore on, public perception of Jonathan began to shift dramatically. Social media investigators had started piecing together evidence, comparing photos from the couple's various social media accounts, and they began seriously questioning the version of events that Jonathan had provided to authorities. The more investigators dug into Jonathan's personal history, the more they discovered that didn't align with his carefully crafted image of the loving, devoted husband. Surveillance footage from a local gym revealed that Jonathan had been there late the night before Elise's supposed disappearance, even though he had specifically claimed to police that he had been home with her that entire evening. What was even more alarming was that Elise's fitness tracker, which was linked to Jonathan's phone, had stopped transmitting any data right after her morning jog should have ended. This suggested that she hadn't actually gone out for a run at all that morning. The investigation into Elise's disappearance was far from over, but one thing was becoming increasingly clear. Jonathan's story simply didn't match the mounting physical evidence, and slowly but surely, police were piecing together a much more chilling truth. It wouldn't be long before the carefully constructed facade that Jonathan had worked so hard to maintain would begin to crumble completely. The investigation into Elise Morgan's disappearance quickly intensified as authorities focused on the growing inconsistencies in Jonathan's account of events. After obtaining a search warrant for the Morgan home, investigators hoped to find something, anything, that could shed light on where Elise had actually gone. What they discovered inside the house was far more unsettling than anyone could have anticipated. The first thing investigators noticed was the unnaturally pristine state of the house. It appeared meticulously clean and orderly, almost unnervingly so. There were no obvious signs of a struggle or forced entry, yet there was an undercurrent of tension that seemed to pervade every corner of their home. As detectives methodically moved through the house, they found a disturbing detail that had been deliberately hidden away. Elise's gym bag and a pair of her jogging shoes were stuffed under the bed in their master bedroom. These items were clearly visible once discovered, but they had been intentionally concealed from view. When questioned about this, Jonathan claimed the items were simply misplaced, but the timing was highly suspicious. How could these essential items have been left behind when Elise was supposedly preparing for her regular morning jog? The search continued into the garage and laundry room, where investigators found another deeply unsettling clue. A blood-stained towel was stuffed behind the dryer, hidden completely out of sight. The blood wasn't fresh, but it was unmistakably human. It appeared to have been there for some time. Jonathan's eyes visibly widened when officers questioned him about the towel, but he offered no reasonable explanation for its presence. His unease was palpable to everyone in the room. As the investigation progressed, police began analyzing security footage from the couple's home surveillance system. Jonathan had been meticulous about setting up this system, ostensibly to provide safety and security, but now it was revealing far more than he had ever intended. The footage from a morning of Elise's disappearance clearly showed Jonathan leaving the house alone at 5:50 in the morning, nearly an hour before he claimed to have noticed that she was missing. What was far more troubling was that there was absolutely no sign of Elise leaving the house at any point during that morning. If she had actually gone for her regular jog, as Jonathan insisted, there should have been clear footage of her walking out their front door. But there wasn't any such footage. Investigators were growing increasingly suspicious of Jonathan's behavior throughout the entire ordeal. He had acted strangely from the very beginning, never breaking down emotionally in the way a truly distraught husband might after the sudden disappearance of his beloved wife. There had been no genuine panic in his voice when he first called police. He never once seemed like someone who had actually lost the love of his life. Instead, he appeared composed, almost emotionally detached from the situation. His public pleas for Elise's safe return were superficially heartfelt, but something fundamental felt wrong about his entire presentation. The more investigators dug into his background and behavior, the more disturbing details they uncovered. Phone record from Jonathan's cellular device revealed a string of calls to a criminal defense attorney just hours after Elise was first reported missing. The timing was deeply alarming and raised serious questions. Why would a man who had just reported the disappearance of his wife to police be seeking legal counsel so quickly? This was a massive red flag that simply couldn't be ignored. Investigators now strongly suspected that Jonathan might have been preparing for something far worse than a missing person case. The breakthrough in the case came when police obtained detailed data from Elise's fitness tracker, which she wore religiously every day as part of her exercise routine. The tracker, which synced automatically to her smartphone, showed absolutely no signs of movement or activity after 6:12 that morning. The device was specifically designed to track steps, heart rate, and various physical activities, but it went completely silent just after the time Jonathan claimed Elise had left the house for her jog. This data completely contradicted the story Jonathan had been telling everyone. Elise hadn't gone for a morning jog at all. In fact, the fitness tracker data strongly suggested that she had never even gotten out of bed that morning. Despite all these mounting inconsistencies and contradictions, Jonathan continued to steadfastly deny any involvement whatsoever in his wife's disappearance. His unnaturally calm demeanor only served to make investigators more certain that something was terribly wrong. They began to seriously suspect that Elise had never actually left their house that morning. They also strongly believed that a violent crime had most likely taken place within the confines of their home. Specialized forensic teams were called in to conduct a much deeper and more thorough investigation of the house. In addition to the bloodstained towel found in the laundry room, they discovered additional traces of Elise's blood in several unexpected locations throughout their home. The walls in the master bedroom showed clear staining, and there were telling smudges along the doorframe of their bathroom. The mounting evidence was starting to point in a single, horrifying direction. Elise had been seriously injured inside their house, and she had very likely been killed there. But the critical question remained, where was her body? Jonathan's carefully maintained facade was finally beginning to crack under the pressure. Investigators knew they were closing in on him, and with each new piece of evidence they discovered, the psychological pressure mounted significantly. They expanded their search to include nearby wooded areas, desperately hoping to find any trace of Elise's remains. Meanwhile, Jonathan remained completely tight-lipped, offering no new information or cooperation whatsoever. But the more thoroughly they examined all the physical evidence, the clearer it became that Elise's disappearance was absolutely no accident. She had been brutally murdered, and Jonathan had been at the center of it all. The chilling truth was finally starting to emerge. Jonathan's carefully curated public image of the perfect husband and successful entrepreneur was falling apart piece by piece. What had initially seemed like a tragic and mysterious disappearance now clearly appeared to be the cold-blooded act of a man willing to do absolutely anything to maintain his illusion of control and to eliminate the wife he no longer considered perfect. As the investigation unfolded, police turned their attention more intensely toward Jonathan, methodically piecing together evidence that suggested he had orchestrated a crime far more sinister than anyone had initially suspected. The turning point came when forensic experts completed their comprehensive analysis of the bloodstains found throughout the house. Elise's blood had been discovered not only in the laundry room, but also in their bedroom, on the carpet, and in their bathroom. It became crystal clear that she had been violently attacked and likely mortally wounded in the early hours of that morning, several hours before Jonathan had called police to report her missing. The blood trail suggested that Elise had desperately tried to escape, had fought back against her attacker, but had ultimately been overpowered. The smears and spatter patterns indicated that she had been dragged from one room to another, her life slowly draining away as she struggled in vain against her killer. Forensic specialists also found traces of Jonathan's DNA mixed with Elise's blood, adding crucial evidence that he had been directly involved in her violent death. Investigators now firmly believed that Elise's disappearance was neither an accident nor a spontaneous event, but rather a planned and brutally executed murder. The more thoroughly they examined the crime scene, the clearer it became that Jonathan had intentionally and methodically killed his wife. The motive, however, remained somewhat unclear to the broader public. Elise's friends and family had been aware of her struggles with weight and body image issues, but no one had ever suspected that Jonathan's obsession with her physical appearance ran so dangerously deep that it could actually drive him to commit murder. Jonathan had always been extremely vocal about his impossibly high standards and his relentless desire for perfection in all aspects of life. He frequently posted about his intense fitness routines, often using Elise as an example of their supposedly shared commitment to maintaining a healthy lifestyle. He had built his entire identity around being the absolute epitome of success, the wildly successful businessman, the ideal devoted husband, and half of a picture-perfect couple that others aspired to emulate. But beneath this carefully polished surface, his obsession with perfection was slowly transforming into a toxic and controlling force that led him to view his wife not as an equal partner, but as merely a reflection of his own perceived failure. If she couldn't meet his impossibly high expectations, she was failing him personally. The investigation began uncovering deeply disturbing details about Jonathan's behavior that painted a portrait of a man who viewed Elise's weight struggles as a personal betrayal of their marriage and public image. He had constantly pressured her to lose weight and maintain the exact body type that had once been admired by their online followers. He had frequently criticized her in private, but it was behind completely closed doors where his psychological cruelty truly flourished. Elise had confided in several close friends that Jonathan's behavior had become emotionally abusive over time, and she had started to genuinely fear him. Yet despite these deeply troubling warning signs, she had continued trying desperately to meet his impossible demands, constantly seeking his approval and validation. Jonathan's obsession wasn't limited just to her physical appearance. It was fundamentally about complete and total control over every aspect of her existence. He controlled virtually every aspect of their daily life, from their meticulously curated social media presence to their minute-by-minute daily routines. He decided what she wore, what she ate, and exactly how she presented herself to the outside world. Her weight became a powerful symbol of his control over her. If she couldn't meet his expectations, she would be failing him. And in Jonathan's twisted worldview, failure was simply not an option under any circumstances. It became abundantly clear that Elise's struggle with her weight was not merely a personal battle, but had become the primary battleground in the larger psychological war that Jonathan was waging against her autonomy and fundamental sense of self-worth. As the investigation continued, more layers of Jonathan's carefully constructed public image were systematically peeled back. His emotional public plea for Elise's safe return now appeared to be nothing more than an elaborate performance, a carefully orchestrated act designed to mask the unspeakable horror he had committed behind closed doors. The breaking point in the case came when Jonathan's own sister courageously came forward to investigators. She had always maintained close relationships with both Jonathan and Elise, and she was among the first to sense that something was seriously wrong in their marriage. She revealed to detectives that several months before Elise's disappearance, Jonathan had confided in her about his growing frustrations with his wife's weight and appearance. He had spoken about his various attempts to motivate her to get back in shape. His obsession with her appearance, combined with his pathological need for absolute control, had made him virtually impossible to live with. She mentioned that Jonathan had even made ominous comments about how Elise would ruin everything they had built together if she didn't take better care of herself. His sister's testimony painted a chilling picture of a man who had not only emotionally manipulated and psychologically abused Elise, but had escalated his demands and threats to a genuinely dangerous level. With the overwhelming mounting evidence, including bloodstains, DNA samples, Jonathan's repeatedly conflicting statements, and his increasingly suspicious behavior throughout the investigation, police were absolutely certain they were dealing with a premeditated murder rather than a simple disappearance. Elise's body, they believed, was hidden somewhere in the immediate vicinity, and they were determined to find it. Finally, after weeks of intensive searching, authorities discovered Elise's remains. Her body had been buried in a shallow grave in a secluded section of forest near their home, just a few miles away from where she had lived and died. The discovery brought both relief and profound tragedy. It provided the answers that Elise's family and friends had been desperately waiting for. Yet the truth behind her death was even darker and more disturbing than anyone had initially imagined. Jonathan Morgan's seemingly perfect life had been built entirely on lies, and now the true horror of what had actually transpired was finally coming to light. The chilling truth was that Jonathan had killed his wife not because of a fleeting moment of uncontrollable rage, but because he fundamentally could not accept her exactly as she was. As Jonathan Morgan's arrest became imminent, the tension surrounding the case reached its absolute peak. The authorities now possessed all the evidence they needed to formally charge him with first-degree murder. But the lingering question remained, why had he actually done it? What had driven a seemingly successful and accomplished man to brutally kill the woman he had once professed to love above all else? The answers lay buried deep within the complex and disturbed layers of his psyche, and as his trial approached, more disturbing details about Jonathan's twisted mindset began to surface. Jonathan's initial legal defense strategy was depressingly familiar. He entered a plea of not guilty, steadfastly insisting that he had absolutely no involvement whatsoever in Elise's death. His high-priced attorneys argued that all the evidence against their client was purely circumstantial and that there was no direct, irrefutable proof linking him to the murder. They claimed that Elise's death could have been the tragic result of an unfortunate accident or perhaps a random act of violence by an unknown perpetrator. They attempted to paint Jonathan as yet another victim in this tragedy, a grieving husband who had been unfairly misjudged by both the public and law enforcement. However, the absolutely overwhelming mountain of evidence against him proved insurmountable. The blood stains throughout their home, the DNA evidence, the hidden gym bag, the numerous inconsistencies in his timeline. Each individual piece of evidence painted a damning portrait of a man who had meticulously planned and executed his wife's murder. As the trial officially began, the prosecution presented a chilling and comprehensive narrative of control, psychological manipulation, and deadly obsession. They painted Jonathan as a man who had cynically used his marriage to Elise as nothing more than a vehicle to feed his own massive ego and to create and maintain the illusion of a perfect life. His relentless and pathological pursuit of perfection had led him to view Elise not as an equal partner deserving of love and respect, but merely as an extension of himself. She had become a reflection of his perceived success, and when she failed to meet his ever-growing and impossible demands, he began to see her as a fundamental flaw in his otherwise supposedly flawless existence. In his completely twisted mind, her inability to lose weight and maintain his ideal body image had become the final straw, an unforgivable failure that he simply could not allow to continue. The prosecution also presented compelling testimony from several recognized experts in domestic abuse and criminal psychology. These professionals explained Jonathan's behavior as a textbook form of coercive control and psychological manipulation. They described in detail how Jonathan had systematically created a toxic environment where Elise's self-worth was constantly undermined and destroyed. He had methodically isolated her from friends and family, controlled her every movement and decision, and demanded that she live up to an ideal that was literally impossible to achieve. The experts explained that this particular type of psychological manipulation very often leads to escalating emotional and physical abuse, and in Jonathan's case, it had ultimately culminated in premeditated murder. His obsession with maintaining perfection had become so all-consuming and destructive that Elise's death was the only way he believed he could restore his illusion of complete control. Throughout the entire trial, Jonathan remained disturbingly cold and emotionally detached. rarely showing any genuine human emotion whatsoever. His unnatural composure seemed deeply unnerving to everyone present in the courtroom. He appeared to be more concerned with maintaining his carefully crafted facade of innocence than with mourning the brutal loss of the woman he had once claimed to love more than life itself. His bizarre behavior throughout the proceedings only served to strengthen the prosecution's argument that he was fundamentally a man who had completely lost touch with basic human empathy and compassion. He had become so utterly consumed by his pathological need for control and perfection that he had lost any ability to genuinely empathize with another human being, least of all his own wife. As the trial progressed week after week, even more disturbing details emerged about Jonathan's life leading up to Elise's murder. Investigators had thoroughly examined his extensive social media presence, where he had meticulously curated an image of the perfect marriage and ideal lifestyle. His posts had been filled with carefully staged pictures of the two of them at expensive restaurants, on exotic vacations, and working out together at their home gym. To the outside world, Jonathan and Elise had appeared to be the absolute epitome of happiness and success. But the reality behind the scenes had been far darker and more sinister than anyone could have possibly imagined. Behind the Instagram filters and carefully crafted posts, Elise had been battling a never-ending psychological pressure to meet Jonathan's completely impossible standards. His social media presence had become yet another extension of his obsessive need for control, a powerful way to present a perfect image to the world while hiding the toxic and abusive reality of their relationship. In stark contrast to Jonathan's disturbing emotional indifference throughout the trial, Elise's family and friends were powerfully vocal in expressing their profound grief. They shared heartbreaking stories of the wonderful woman they had lost forever. They described Elise as genuinely kind, deeply loving, and profoundly caring, but also as someone who had been forced to suffer in complete silence. She had always put on a brave face, desperately trying to meet Jonathan's expectations, even as her own sense of self-worth steadily deteriorated. They painted a vivid picture of a woman who had been trapped in a relationship that had slowly but systematically drained her emotionally, mentally, and ultimately physically. When the jury finally returned their verdict after days of deliberation, there was a palpable sense of finality throughout the packed courtroom. Jonathan Morgan was found guilty of first-degree murder. The conviction represented a bittersweet victory for Elise's devastated family and friends, who had fought tirelessly and courageously to bring her killer to justice. They had always instinctively known that something was terribly wrong, but it was only through the painstaking investigation and trial that the full extent of Jonathan's cruelty and manipulation was finally revealed to the world. Jonathan Morgan was sentenced to life in prison without any possibility of parole. As the gavel came down for the final time, it marked the end of a long and incredibly painful journey for everyone who had loved Elise. They had lost a daughter, a sister, a friend, and a woman who had been trapped in a relationship that had ultimately cost her everything, including her life. While justice had finally been served, the emotional scars left by Elise's senseless death would never completely fade. And for Jonathan, the life he had so carefully constructed, his meticulously crafted image of success, his elaborate facade of control, had all come crashing down around him, leaving him to face the harsh and unforgiving truth of what he had become. If this story has opened your eyes to the hidden dangers that can lurk behind perfect social media facades, please subscribe to stay informed about more cases like this. Your awareness could help save someone's life.